Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science. You got your Alabama brain on?
Oh, man. If my Alabama brain is my less well-performing brain, then what would the upgrade be? A Florida brain?
Well, you said it, not me. Well, you may have forgotten that I'm also from Alabama. It's hard to forget. I forgot exactly what you said now. Do you remember?
So we were talking about that last episode we recorded, and we were talking about a paper that the lead author.
Oh, yeah.
The lead author had what we think is a Polish name, and it was very difficult for me to pronounce. And I was telling you that when we're sitting here just having idle conversation and we're off the air, I can probably approximate the correct pronunciation pretty closely. Mm-hmm. But when the pressure's on, my Alabama brain takes over and I just go full redneck on it.
You're going to have to apologize for that. I had a little Alabama brain moment there.
I'm sorry. What is that saying about like in the moment you don't rise to the level of your expectations, you fall to the level of your training or something like that?
Yeah.
So
that sounds close enough.
Oh, man.
You know, I hired a student years ago. She's now a professor, but she was from Italy and had studied some Latin, like, you know, knew more about the language and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she gets over to Mississippi, where I'm teaching a plant course, you know. And first thing I did, I was like, okay, well, you need to enroll in the course and take it, because it was split level. You know, graduate students would take it commonly. And we get out there on day number one.
I know where this is going.
You know, I'm saying these Latin names of these plants I'm teaching everybody, and she just is laughing at me every time I say something. And I'm like, what is it? And I remember now it was red maple. You know, it's first day plants. We're learning just some basic things that are everywhere. And this particular plant, it was, you know, just this little seedling. It was red maple. Well, I say, yes, Acer, the genus. And she laughed, and I finally was like, what are you laughing at? Are you laughing at my pronunciation? Like, I thought I had that one. Is that not right? And she's like, no, it's our chair. I was like, what? Which I can't even mimic. You know, she's saying it in an Italian accent. I'm still saying it in Alabama. But she's like, no, it's pronounced our chair. So then the thing became, every time I'd give them a new plant, she had to tell us how to really pronounce it after I butchered it.
It's like, listen,
your pain.
It's like, listen, there ain't a beautiful word ever come out of this mouth, so we can just move beyond that.
Have you ever heard me talk?
But I'm like that with scientific names. There's certain ones, and I think the first time I ever TA'd a habitat class was in 2009. So that's
it's been a day or two.
That's, you know, almost 15 years ago or whatever. And in spite of that, every now and then there's one that'll hang me up, you know, and it's like in my mind, I got it, I'm good, I memorize it, I'm fine. But then when I have to say it out loud in front of somebody, it's just like, oh, this did not go well.
Well, I'd proceeded to, I was like, listen, I say the words the way that will help me spell them.
Yeah.
So if it, you know, I try to say it
That's
as
right.
phonetically accurate as I can to make it, you know, come up with the right spelling in my head.
How did she pronounce Croton?
I don't remember. I don't know if we had. Well, we definitely had doveweed.
There's some of those that I'm
Woolly
thankful.
croton.
There's some of those that I'm thankful for though too, especially like
Mhm.
any Latin name that has a specific epithet of Virginianus or Virginiana. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm good there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was just funny because it was literally one that I didn't even think there could be another way to say
Right,
that.
right.
And I've never heard anybody say it any other way. But she's like, "No, it's Altair." And I was like, "If I started actually using the pronunciation, I would never be able to spell one of
That's
these
right.
things."
That's right.
In fact, I'm pretty sure that when we got back to the office, I showed her how I would spell a chair.
Mhm.
Yeah.
ACHAIR. A chair. That's something you sit in.
Yeah, that's something you sit in. That's funny.
So speaking of plants, we've gotten a lot
Oh,
of
was that a cue for me?
it was, but you missed it, so I just figured I'd
I know.
continue.
Yeah,
So
you go ahead.
so speaking of plants, we're on the heels now of a couple of episodes with Dr. Craig Harper, who did a fantastic job going
Mhm.
into explaining implementation, particularly of brooding cover.
Man, you know what? Those episodes are dense.
They are.
I have listened to them multiple times.
Yeah, and I mean, there were a couple people that commented, I think, on one of the reels that we posted highlighting,
Mhm.
some clips on Instagram, and they said, several listeners said that they had done the same thing and they were taking
Yeah.
notes on the episode. And I commented and said that I've listened to them multiple times, and that's not an exaggeration
Yeah.
because, especially, I think it was in that second episode, there were some things that Craig shared that I had never heard from him before, in spite of the
Mhm.
fact that you and I both talk to him on a regular basis. And I wanted to incorporate that into my management toolbox.
Yeah, and working with Craig for years, like we have, he's so knowledgeable, and I really have kind of looked to him and John Grucci.
Hmm.
They're the guys that I look at for field stuff.
Hmm.
Like, they know it. And they've got a lot of experience, done really cool work on it, research wise. And I have over the years tried to pick their brain just over and over about it
Yeah.
because I think it's that's one of the things that we just it's a low hanging fruit that people could really get a long ways really fast, but we can't seem to get over the hump.
Hmm.
Like I never go on a property. I mean, it's just super rare to
Yeah.
go on a property and have any fields that are being managed well for brooding cover.
Right.
It's just not that common.
Same. I've had the same experiences, and I think it's because it's one of the most that requires the most intensive management of
Mhm.
any of the other cover types that we try to manage for turkeys.
But
Um,
it also the return on it is
yeah,
so fast
yeah, it
compared to
is.
some other things.
It is. But one of the things, kind of building off what you said about Craig, that I appreciate so much about him, and probably part of the reason that we heard it there for the first time, is that he's constantly adapting and evolving his management recommendations and the techniques that
Mhm.
he personally uses based off of his research.
Mhm.
And we didn't go into it, and I probably didn't even need to ask him because I think I know the answer. But if I had to guess, he's developed that field management protocol off the back of Wade Jafeller's and Bonner
Mhm.
Powell's work in old
Yep.
field communities, where they specifically tested over a period of, I think it was like 5 or 6 years,
Mhm.
on how to
Yeah,
convert,
15 sites, I
yeah, how
think.
to convert fields over from exotic pasture grasses, and
Mhm.
Wade did that first, and then the next student Bonner transitioned into how to continue to manage those to be in various suitable conditions for different
Mhm.
habitat requirements.
Right.
And I think
Well, and
Craig has
they
even
were
updated his management based off of what they found in those
yeah.
studies.
Well, and the thing that was really interesting about those studies, which, by the way, I did a post on this on social media when the paper came out. I don't That hasn't been that long ago, but we can put the link in there. It's a really phenomenal resource, but one of the things that I thought was super valuable about it is they didn't just look at how you manage the fields, they also looked at whether or not you needed to plant anything.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, if you go in and kill a bunch of the sod grass, they also started from different places, so you can kind of apply it to where you're starting from on your property. But in most cases, he's basically said, rarely do you ever need to plant anything to develop high quality brood cover.
Right.
So where you would plant stuff is if you have specific plant species, like you're trying to restore native ground cover, or
Mm-hmm.
you have a particular aesthetic, like John Grucci was talking about, where maybe you want the brood cover to be a bunch of pretty wildflowers, or you
Yeah.
have some other.
I think you said depends on how close it is to the barn.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So like there's reasons that sometimes you might want to bring plant material onto the place, but if your mission is just to make good brooding cover, basically isn't needed.
Yeah. And to take that a
Just
step further, they reported not only was the structure and species composition of fields that were killed and allowed to naturally revegetate just as good as the
hmm
planted native warm season grass forb mix, but it was 4x cheaper to
yeah,
naturally revegetate the site.
yeah, way easier, way cheaper. So yeah, I think that was some good stuff. But I think one of the problems that is being portrayed, I guess, from our audience to us through comments and questions and DMs and all that stuff. A lot of folks still, they're with us. They're getting there on how to do this, what to do, but they still want they need some indicator plants, I guess.
Hmm.
Like what are some indicators that we're on the right track, that this is working, other than just structure? Which I think one thing is a lot of this is just about structure.
That's right.
The composition, we have some particular plants in the composition that make the desirable structure, but
Yeah.
you can interchange a lot of those plants and still have high quality brood cover, I
Yeah.
guess.
And to that effect, I had a surprising conversation with Craig one time. I think this was probably 4 or 5 months ago. But I was kind of outlining a new project that I wanted to undertake, a research project, and it had to do with vegetation management and brooding cover.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I was asking him about was quantifying the availability of insect-based forage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what he shared with me, because he's done a lot of that work, I
Yeah.
think even back to
All
graduate school.
Yeah, he actually developed a method to measure it
Right.
during grad school,
And what he
which I
shared,
I have done a few times, and I don't want to do it anymore.
right. And what he shared with me that ties back into your point, um, about the structure really being
hmm
kind of one of the most important aspects of this, is that he said that insect abundance is rarely limiting for upland birds, for chicks or poults. He said the most limiting factor often, and in fact, I should expand on that a little bit further. He even said that, oftentimes insect abundance is adequate to meet nutritional needs, even like in woodlands, for
hmm
these species, but like turkey poults. But what is oftentimes lacking is the structure of vegetation to allow adequate access to those
hmm
insects for forage. And so that's where the
Right.
structure comes in. And that shocked me because I've always taught, even in my habitat classes in the past, like, you really want these native grasses, and particularly you want native forbs because they are such great insect attractors, and they are. And your
hmm
insect abundance is probably going to be higher in those areas. Everybody knows you're going to flush more insects walking through a field than you are a forest typically. But that
Was kind
having
of
those.
separating insect production from insect availability.
Exactly. Right. And so that really, again, emphasizes the importance of that structure.
hmm Yeah. Well, I still do think there is value in folks knowing some plants and
Oh,
knowing whether or
absolutely.
not
Unquestionably.
are they, you know, does this mean I'm on track or not?
Right.
So I wanted to put your Alabama brain on the spot real quick. A little pressure. We'll see if your accent changes or, is there.
But before
Uh,
we do that, can we just real?
oh, come on, man. I
I,
was
I
just
think.
transitioned perfectly into this.
Oh, I know I screwed up your whole
Wait,
segue, but I think it does bear going briefly into. I think we should describe briefly, what we're looking for structure wise for brooding and nesting cover.
okay. You want to
Um,
go back to that?
yeah, just real brief. And so, like
Okay.
for me with brooding cover, I'm thinking about vegetation that is on average about knee height, maybe mid shin height, comprised primarily of wildflowers slash forbs with a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
grass mixed in that has open structure underneath at ground level.
Mm-hmm.
Is that consistent with what you think of from a structure perspective?
Oh, yeah. Pretty consistent. And I think that's pretty consistent with what Craig
Right,
says. And my vision of that has been shaped from him as a mentor.
right.
Uh, I think one thing that you were saying, the height, it's important that you have that height so that hens have visibility in that. That doesn't mean that there can't be anything taller than that.
That's right.
We're just talking about there's maybe corridors through the field or
Yeah,
whatever that she can see down a
yeah.
good ways, but you might have some patches in there or some plants that are taller than that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe over here you've got some tall dog fennel, and over
Yeah.
here you've got a 6 foot tall pokeweed plant or
Mhm.
something like that. But on average, across most of the stand, you want it to be about 3 feet tall or shorter.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, so that facilitates that visibility. The other thing that you said, having some grass in it's fine.
hmm
You know, Craig always throws out that number 30% or less coverage of grass. I will add that the type of grass is important in this case because if it's a sod forming grass like common Bermuda or Bahia or, I mean, Timothy, I mean, we could just go on.
yeah,
If you want, go listen to Craig. He named like 15 when he was just
yes,
rattling off in conversation. Uh, those sod forming grasses are particularly detrimental to the structure that you're trying to achieve.
hmm
So you don't want any of it to be that grass or
yeah,
very little of it. If it's, like John said, getting rid of common Bermuda totally might not be a feasible option. So, reducing it down to very little coverage, as little as you can.
yeah,
So the grasses are those native warm season grasses that are clump farming. They're not spreading across the ground like
right.
your yard or whatever.
So while we're on that, my list, and you can help me fill in any that I miss of grasses that are oftentimes exotic pasture grasses that are also sod forming that you need to be able to identify because they're often detrimental or they decrease habitat quality for turkeys are Bahia grass, which is going to be deeper down in the south, like upper coastal plain.
Mm-hmm.
Bermuda grass, common throughout most of the south. Um, I would say I would throw in some of the other paspalums too. They're even though they usually have lower coverage, like Dallas
Anything,
grass.
yeah. Look up the genus Paspalum. All of those are poor.
Right. And then as you
Yeah,
move
Vasey's grass.
right, and then as you move further up into the mid South, fescue is going to be a big one, and fescue is going to go all the way up into the northeastern
Mm-hmm.
United States. And along with those, you'll also have, Timothy. You already mentioned. You'll have
Mm-hmm.
orchard in some places.
Yeah, that's
Um,
common in the mid south.
brome will be another one. So those are your common, I would say, grass species that are oftentimes problematic for turkey habitat that you should probably be familiar with depending on where you are in the turkey's range.
Mm-hmm. Another one that's in the deep south that folks love the plant for some reason is ryegrass.
Yeah. And specifically annual ryegrass. So we're not talking about cereal rye because a lot of people
Right.
get confused on that. Cereal rye is oftentimes planted as a food plot,
Yeah.
and it doesn't
Yeah.
have
If
a
it's a cereal grain,
yeah,
that's fine.
right.
So that's rye.
Yep.
You're
And
right.
then you've got annual ryegrass. And
Yeah.
annual ryegrass has been intentionally planted across untold thousands of acres throughout the southeast. And a lot of people have planted it just to have a green patch, right? To hunt
Mm-hmm.
over in the fall for
It's
deer.
super common in food plot mixes
Yes, it's
for deer.
sold in commercial blends all the time. It is very rare that you have a piece of open ground in the southeast that if you run a disc over it in August or September, that is not going to come back in a pure stand of ryegrass.
I mean, everywhere I go, man, right? From late April through mid June,
Hmm.
there's a sea of ryegrass.
Right.
It's
And
obvious because you've got the seed. The plant has gone to seed, flowered and seed, and man, it really shows me how expensive it is because it's just covering up everywhere you
well,
are.
I kind of feel bad that I haven't recognized it as being as problematic as it is for brooding cover um, until only recently. And I think a big reason for that is that I tend to do a lot of my landowner site visits during summertime most years,
Mm-hmm.
but this year I got several in, during the kind of like late spring period, and
Mm-hmm.
I came across all these, just one food plot after another, after another, after another that had been planted in something else during the fall, but was now had almost 100% coverage of annual
Mm-hmm.
ryegrass, and it grows so densely that it precludes almost any brood use.
Mm-hmm.
And I just hadn't recognized it as that problematic for broods up until this year, really.
Yeah. I was already kind of down on ryegrass. I mean, I'm talking about like a decade ago.
Well, I always thought of it
When I,
as competing with stuff that you wanted to plant and
yeah, yeah.
grow, you know?
Well, I know, but even people plant it on purpose,
Yeah.
as part of their food plot. And I've been really down on it because I came from a family that was what we planted.
Hmm.
And
Did
I
you
went
plant it
up,
every year?
yes, which we can talk about that too.
You don't need to,
But,
folks. If you want to keep, we're
but
not suggesting anybody keep it around, but if you want to,
if,
it's easy.
if anybody anybody ever planted an opening, even if it's just near where your food plot is, you got it. You don't need to plant it. It's going to come up in there if you
Right.
disc it in the fall. So anyway, I went up to Tennessee to work with Craig for my master's, and one of the things that we were doing was all these food plot trials where we were measuring production and selectivity of deer and all that stuff. And that was, it was right in the middle of that. Part of my own research project was on some of the warm season stuff, but I was helping manage a bunch of food plots and everything. And we were doing this selection, and I was like, wow, ryegrass is second to last. And it wasn't last because we also had orchard grass
Yeah.
in the diet selection. And I was like,
Hmm.
wow, that it's really poor. It's not that they won't eat it, but when they have a bunch of options, it shakes out last.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just amazing to me. But the other thing that I've heard people say it, and I've also had some personal experiences with it where, oh yeah, we planted some ryegrass in one of those, and some got in my boot, and it grew out of it. The plant literally germinated and grew out of my boot. Like you spill some in the back of the truck, and you can keep a stand in the back of the
Yeah.
truck.
I've done that.
Like it just grows everywhere.
Yeah.
I've made a joke with some folks. You can throw it up there on the roof and it'll be fine.
Yeah. Which is another reason why it's so widespread and abundant because, any kind of soil disturbance that is a part
Mm-hmm.
of a timber harvest or construction project or road grading or anything like that during the wintertime, they're throwing out ryegrass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just it grows under a wide array of circumstances, and it's going to be green. And deer, I mean, it's not that they won't eat it; they will eat it, especially if it's the only option. But uh, yeah, it's just been so ubiquitous, and I felt it absolutely necessary if we're going to have this discussion about problematic species that we've got to cover that one.
Yeah.
Again, if you want to look it up, if you don't know what it looks like and you want to know what the seed head looks like, look up ryegrass and make sure it's the genus Lolium.
It's
And
also called Italian rye a lot.
mhm. So, uh, but look up that plant and seed head, and once you see that seed head, go, look around in the spring, and it'll be obvious to you
Yeah.
how much of it you have,
And
which
what it
is
does
usually
is
surprising to people.
it comes on in the fall. It starts, it's a cool
Mhm,
season grass, so it comes on in the fall. It'll grow, slow down a little bit in midwinter, but then when spring comes around, it really gets its legs under it and starts putting on rapid growth rate, and that'll continue up until it seeds out, usually around, depending on where you are, late April, maybe mid May. But
mhm,
it'll seed out, produce those seed heads, form a very dense stand. But the problem with it is it just hangs around even until poults are hitting the ground, because it
mhm.
dies, but it's such a dense stand that it persists for quite a
Yeah.
while before it actually starts
Well,
to degrade and break down, and prevents poults from using it. And just
yeah.
I know you want to say something, but I got to finish this thought. This is a good one.
Go ahead. Go
But you
ahead.
think about all those areas where we just talked about it being roadsides where it's been planted, food plots, ag fields. You can find it. You can find it in pastures.
All the margins, yeah.
All the areas that are potentially your brooding habitat are where it's going to take hold.
Mhm. And if you haven't taken care to get rid of it, you probably are overtaken with it.
Yeah,
And it definitely are if you've been planting it.
right.
What I was gonna say, I felt compelled just last week, so we're recording this in the middle of June. Just last week, I went and visited a property and doing some work with a landowner who's, same boat with a lot of these people. They're worried about their turkeys and they want to make some changes on their property habitat wise. And I mean, every field, every one planted in ryegrass. It was just
Hmm.
covered up with it. And I felt compelled to take pictures and videos of it so that I could use it as content to show people
Yeah,
what it looks like once it dies and then finally lays down. So in these fields, we're talking about mid June. Now that thatch has all died where it went to seed and is laid over. And there's no way a poult can walk through that.
yeah.
It's just a dense mess of grass.
Well,
It's just
I was on a property last week where they had the same ryegrass problem, but they had a bunch of food plots that they had planted in a mix back in fall, and one of the species they included in that food plot blend was arrowleaf clover,
mhm,
which should be performing pretty well this time of year in most places as long as it's gotten adequate rainfall. And turkeys will eat some of that, but deer will definitely be hammering it this time of year. But the
mhm,
ryegrass was forming such a dense mat that you had
mhm,
very sporadic and limited distribution of arrowleaf clover throughout the food plot, because it
yeah,
was basically like going to Home Depot and grabbing a bunch of bales of pine straw and just throwing it on top of your food plot.
mhm. Well, that's what it looked like there. It looked you could I mean, there was bales of hay.
Yeah,
It looked you couldn't see the ground because it was
right,
so thick,
right.
and it's I don't know, it's one of those things, some things just kinda start getting under your skin. It's like, I just see it so much now.
Hmm.
Like, it just is a sore thumb
It's one of those things you
everywhere
can't
I go.
unsee once you've noticed it.
Yeah, and it's like, "Man, dang it."
Yeah,
Get all of our brooding cover we've got all these studies from everywhere showing that brooding cover is a problem,
yeah,
just like you just said, basically all of our options for where we could have some high quality stuff, it's just
right.
covered up with ryegrass. So I feel like we are getting on to our grass thing again.
Hmm.
So maybe we should correct this ship before we go
Okay.
too far
You
down
want to
this.
put me back on the spot
So you
since I
remember like
led us down that
30
rabbit hole?
minutes ago
Yeah,
when I had this beautiful segue that you interrupted to get us on the grass?
I do.
Uh, What plants do we want in there? Let's quit talking about the ones we don't want for a
Right.
minute. Let's talk about some plants that are good indicators that we're on the right track.
Yeah, and so these are going to be just a starting point, right? Like a
Yeah.
list that people can go through and start learning. I'm specifically going to try to include on my list, plants that forbs particularly that are commonly
Mhm.
occurring, because there's going to be a lot of them out there that you'll see intermittently. Um,
Mhm.
but I don't consider. I don't want to say they're not important. They're less important just because they're limited in coverage and distribution, right?
Mhm.
Um,
They're probably not gonna be dominating
yes,
most people's early
right,
successional
right.
plot.
So these are kind of a starting point that they can build out their knowledge from there, and to do that, one of the things that I know that you and I talked about quite a bit earlier today was that we might want to point some people to some resources that they can use to identify these
Mhm.
plants.
Yep.
And one of the ones that I use is iNaturalist. It's a free app.
Yeah.
Does a pretty good job if you take a picture of the plant. You know, if you don't have good internet connection, then you're out in a rural area. You can wait till you get back, and then you can run it through the app, and it'll help you identify it. Most of the time, it'll at least get you to genus.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great one, and, I mean, I'm from Alabama, and I'm getting kinda old. I work with people, I'm sure you do too, and they're like, "You know what? I don't even know what an app is."
Right.
But, I have recently been turned on to another app that's actually like a sub app, I guess. Of it's like seems like it's getting more complex. I'm trying to make it less complex. So there's another app that's from that naturalist group called Seek, and I just recently got it, and I really like it. It's designed more for novice users. It feels like to me, and it's
Hmm.
really good. And it's not just for plants. I've taken pictures of frogs and stuff with it. It tells
Hmm.
you what those are too. But particularly if it has a flower on it, it's going to nail it.
Yeah.
And
And
and it's been surprisingly accurate with a bunch of plants that did not have a flower on them.
right. And one thing that I told you about this morning too that you were previously unaware of, I was too. My wife taught me about it, but apparently with the newer iOS, so if you have a newer updated iPhone, mine's a couple generations old and it still does it. So, but if you take a picture with your phone, you don't want to download a third party app to identify the plant. You can just open the picture and then drag up on the photo, and there should be a link down there that says "look up plant," and it actually does a pretty good job too.
Mm, that's a really I didn't know about that until you told me today.
If you
I'm going to
want
try it.
if you want something in print to help you out, a good book that I would recommend is Forest Plants and Their Wildlife Uses. That's by Miller and Miller. Last time I
Hmm.
looked at it, it was about $40, $37, something like that.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of good photos in there, and it also has wildlife uses listed for a lot of the
Hmm.
plants as well. It's not every single plant you find it won't specifically say whether it's good or bad,
Hmm.
indifferent for turkeys, but it's a good starting point. And then Craig
I was
Harper's
going to,
book too.
yeah, I was going to say Craig's book. It has a section in the back of it with plants in it that it's another great resource that you can kind of brush up on plants.
Yeah, that
I've heard
one.
Craig say this as well. Uh, what were you saying?
I was going to try to share the name of that one. I've got it on my shelf somewhere over there.
Yeah,
Um,
it's early.
Wildlife. There it is. Wildlife Food Plots and Early Successional Plants by Harper.
Yeah, great. That's a phenomenal book for a lot of reasons, but it also has that resource to help you with plants. But that's kind of what we were thinking about here. Is first of all, those are some tools at your disposal that can help you with plant identification in the field. And the AI stuff is getting so good now. I mean, it's not like it's most of the time right on point.
Even with just green leaves and no flower.
Yeah, like I was at Tall Timbers recently teaching a course, and I get out in a pine savanna like that that's hyper diverse, and
Mhm.
there's 20% of the forbs I don't know what they are,
Yeah.
and I don't see that many plants that I don't have any idea what they are.
Yeah.
I've just everywhere I go, if I see a bunch of plants that I don't know what they are, I try to figure out what they are, and then I
Right.
know what they are.
Right.
So
And
I don't.
that's how you build out your
Yeah,
mental catalog too, is
right, right,
start with a
right.
small group of 10, 15 common ones, and then
Yeah,
every time you see something you don't know, just add to that list.
right. Well, and that's what turned me on this app. Is I get out there, and some of these plants are probably really rare, and that's why I've never seen them.
Mhm.
and I get out there and I'm using this app, and I was able to figure out what everything was.
Right.
So now I know what they are. So I think that's the value is, and I was saying earlier, uh, I've heard Craig say it a few times, and I tell basically every landowner I work with this: take some time to learn plants. You don't have to learn all of them, but knowing 10 or 15 plant species that are desirable and then a handful of ones that you really don't want around is pretty important for you to evaluate success.
Hmm.
So that's what we're trying to do here. And there's those apps are useful, but it's also useful to kind of have a base of some plants to be looking for. And you can go, look up some of these names if you don't know what they look like. Uh, Go look the plant up and get a good idea of what it looks like. And then when you see it in the field, it'll stick out to you.
Right. Johnson grass was another one that we should have mentioned earlier as a problematic grass.
Yeah.
Sorry, that just popped
Basic.
into my mind.
Yeah. If you disc in the spring or summer, you're going to have Johnson
Yeah.
grass. I don't even understand. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
where is it coming from?
I know.
Just like, is there just seeds everywhere? Or are they that good at getting to the disc area? Or, what? I don't understand it, but you can count on it.
All right, so let's talk about some stuff we like.
Yeah.
So I'll
That's the
go.
question I posed to you like
I
20
know,
minutes ago.
35 minutes ago now at this point. So my first answer for a forb that I would view as desirable in early successional plant communities is actually a genus that contains many forbs, and it's Lespedeza.
Mhm.
And the Lespedezas, there's a whole host of native species that we have, a diversity depending on where you are throughout the U.S. that are both provide a high quality green forage that will be fed on by both turkeys and deer. It's as good as a lot of the food plot
Mhm.
plantings that we intentionally plant in terms of protein content, but it's also a prolific seed producer for birds, all birds, including turkeys. And it's a pretty good insect attractor as well.
Mhm.
And so the Lespedezas, and you can look up and see which ones are common to your area, but there are also some ones that you want to watch out for. And in
Mhm. I
particular,
was
the
about to say
one
that.
that most people have a problem with in early successional areas is Sericea or Chinese. It's also oftentimes also referred to Lespedeza.
Mhm.
It can be a real bad invader of disturbed sites of early successional areas, difficult to get rid of. It does produce a seed that will be eaten by birds, but that seed is so hard that it's indigestible. So they can fill
Mhm.
up their crop, but they're not getting any nutrient value from it. So a very damaging plant that also can grow so densely that it's excluding other more
Mhm.
beneficial plants from that area as well.
Man, when you have it, man, you can get covered up with it. Especially, I see it in Mid South more, but a lot of folks have a real problem with it.
Well, that's another one like ryegrass that has been on the list of erosion control plants for a lot of
Yeah.
contractors for many, many years. So they'll
Well,
intentionally seed it in because it grows everywhere.
yeah. Well, and it also biologically is pretty interesting. You have to kind of appreciate some of the characteristics of some of these plants that make them so problematic. It's also a brilliant strategy. But that plant has been really commonly used in like mine reclamation,
Yeah,
where the soil might be 4 pH or something.
like up
It's
in
just
Virginia.
and basically turn this mountain on top of itself, and something to put a plant to put back into that site
Hmm.
that has been used for that. And it actually has a strategy. I think that I don't remember right off what the technical term for it is, but it's like a soil degrader. Does that sound familiar to you?
Mm-mm.
So
I'm learning
basically,
right now.
yeah, most of the legumes, most of the legumes are thought of as a soil builder.
Right.
So like if you plant crimson clover, it produces some excess nitrogen that
Hmm.
is available to other plants. So it kind of builds the the soil to be more productive. Well, this one is the opposite. and there's multiple plants like this, and they have various strategies of it, and I can't recall exactly how this one does it, but it is essentially making the site poorer so that it's more competitive with other species,
Are
which
you
is kind
kidding
of
me?
weird. No, no, I'm not kidding you at all.
I'm gonna have to gobble at that. As if I needed another reason to hate that fucking plant.
Man, that was a good gobble. I just got chills from that gobble.
Who says they don't gobble in June?
Well, this is one of the, y'all pick on me a lot about it, but sometimes I find unusual things like that really fascinating. I kind of dig around,
Yeah.
find stuff, and that's one trait I remember about that plant that was just like, no
It makes
wonder,
sense
man.
because you always see it on some of the crappiest sites that you can
Yeah.
possibly find. And I just always assumed that it had a competitive advantage there, not
Hmm.
that it was so much of
Well, and
a,
that was the reason it was used for that purpose, is
yeah,
because there's nothing else that will grow there,
yeah.
but yeah, apparently
So birds can
it'll,
starve with a crop full of it, and it actually decreases the fertility of your soil at the same time.
yeah, I don't know to what extent, but I remember reading that about it from a plant ecologist. So,
Wow.
it's truth.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty
All right.
cool.
So that's my first forb. What's another one that's real common that you would view as beneficial in these areas?
Well, the
Well,
one,
actually, let me back up because we spent so much time on Sericea. The native Lespedezas, I want to reiterate, can be very beneficial to brooding cover.
yeah, I agree with you. So, that's a great genus. Uh, well, I was going to tell you a species, but now I feel like I need to go with a genus. I'm going to go with the species because it's one that multiple times in the past couple of weeks I have gotten a weird look, or people, you know, calling BS on me or whatever when I'm talking to them out in the field. Common ragweed. That's one
Man, you
that's,
went with the low hanging fruit on that one.
well, I thought so too, but uh, I'm interacting with a few folks, and they're like, "Man, that's the one that gives us all allergies. We've been trying to kill that."
Yeah.
And it's one that if you scratch the dirt, you're probably going to get some of it,
Hmm.
and it's not going to have a showy flower. So, but it's kind of that quintessential example of something that's going to be common in your brood patches if you're, you know, taking care of them and doing it right. You're probably going to have some ragweed in it, and it's a good idea to know what that looks like, and it's pretty distinct.
Hmm.
So, common ragweed,
Excellent seed producer for turkeys. Excellent,
absolutely,
provides excellent structure, can form a little canopy that poults can run
yes,
around under, attracts insects, and you won't find a better summer deer forage.
yeah, yeah. It's high crude protein, 30% plus. Uh, one I did a video with for the land beat with Whitetail Properties a couple of years ago, but I think you said something that made me think of it, and I want to say it here. That plant is a really good example of a structural characteristic of a lot of our native forbs that are desirable, and it's the reason they're producing the kind of desirable structure that we want. If you look at ragweed or a bunch of these other native forbs, they originate from a single stem, and they basically self prune as they grow. So what you end up with is this stalk of a stem that's about the size of a pencil, and it doesn't have any leaves in it, all the way up, often a foot tall.
Hmm.
And once you start seeing it getting toward maturity, you'll have all that open space underneath it. It's sort of like an umbrella where it has that nice structure and a lot of bare ground underneath it.
Hmm.
So that's a good example of that ragweed just is a quintessential example of producing that kind of structure. You see it on a variety of other forbs, and I'm sure we're going to
Yeah.
throw some of them out here.
Right.
But
So
that's definitely one I'm looking for, and it's probably going to be present if you're trying to do this.
Right. So since you threw out ragweed, I'll throw out its cousin plant, partridge pea.
Yeah.
Another beneficial
Yep.
native forb, excellent seed producer, probably a better seed
Hmm.
producer than ragweed is. But the
You know what?
reason,
I feel like I should do a fun fact on each one because
yeah,
I have fun facts about them.
please do.
I got one on both of these.
Okay,
Actually, I got a couple of them on both of them.
okay.
You want to do that now, or you want to finish your spiel?
I think I was almost finished, but excellent
Okay.
seed producer, good structure. Both of these plants, if you've ever been out on a traditional wild quail hunting operation, you'll see brood
Hmm.
patches scattered throughout the property that they are disking annually in the wintertime. That's very important. They need to
Hmm.
be, if you disc in the wintertime, a lot of times these plants will naturally respond from the seed bank, partridge
Hmm.
pea and ragweed side by side. You'll have some other stuff mixed in there.
Yeah, it'll
But
be, in my experience, it's usually dominated by ragweed.
mhm,
Partridge pea would be the next in line, and then you'll
yep.
have a few other things.
And as you can imagine, it's right there in the name, partridge. I always ask my
Hmm.
students this. I'm like, "What does that sound like?" And they're like, "I don't know. It's like quail, like partridge is an
Yeah.
old word or old word for quail, but um, they don't get it a lot of times. But I mean, it's right there in the name that it's beneficial for game birds, right?
Hmm.
So another really desirable one. I hope this doesn't step on your toes with your fun fact. This one's a less
Oh,
than
I got plenty.
okay. This one's a less than fun fact, but and you and I have talked about this pretty recently, I think, is that partridge pea is found in a lot of native seed blends that you can buy commercially to plant
Hmm.
and reestablish. But oftentimes, what you'll find is it seems like it plays out this way every time I talk to a landowner who's done it. They buy this native warm season grass forb seed blend, they plant it, and then within a few years, the grass coverage gets too high, and so they do something to set back the grass coverage, and then what happens?
That partridge pea just takes over the
The
plant.
partridge pea absolutely takes over, and the partridge pea variety, whatever it is that they have in that
Yeah, it's
seed
that
mix
cultivar. Yeah.
from I think it's from the Midwest is where it
Hmm.
originated from. But it'll grow like chest high,
Yeah,
whereas
and
our Nate,
that's one thing I was going to say. I don't recommend you searching the internet trying to find these plants to plant them
yes,
because you can run into situations like that. And that's, the native partridge pea is going to be that knee height that you were talking
yes,
about earlier, whereas
yes,
this cultivar, it might be waist high or more.
right,
And it also gets pretty thick.
it does. And so I've seen multiple instances where people have planted it and it's become rank, and
Hmm.
they actually have to do something to try to get rid of it. So
Yeah.
just a word of warning.
Yep. Yep. That's good.
So
That was
what's our
not my
fun
fun fact.
fact?
About which one?
Either, both.
Come on now. You got to. All right. We'll
Partridge
start with
pea.
ragweed. Classic. You can't even do that better. We did not plan that. All right, I'm going with ragweed because we started with ragweed, and I felt like it would kind of stress you back into your Alabama
That simple
brain for a
mind
minute.
can't change gears without grinding at this point.
I can see it grinding right now. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm sorry. Um, which one did I say? Ragweed. Ragweed, I think is really cool. One of the things about ragweed seed, well, first of all, it's 90% plus of the allergies. People always say it's goldenrod. Well, that's because it's showy and it flowers about the same
Hmm.
time and peaks at about the same time. Most of your allergies are probably attributed to that, and the estimate is like 90% of allergies attributable to that plant, which is why a lot of people don't want it, and it's one of our most valuable wildlife plants, and certainly for turkey brooding. But the seeds, there's these tiny little seeds, inconspicuous. It's hard to even find them on the plant. Uh, they apparently are really hard seeds. So you also talked about the timing of disking. A
Yeah.
lot of our native forbs, they have a hard seed and they overwinter really well, and seed bank build and that kind of thing. And if you disc in the winter and they have some time before the growing season, a lot of the problematic stuff doesn't seem to handle that very well. You end up with a propensity of native plants. So that timing is pretty important. But that seed is a really good example of a plant that's well adapted for disturbance and intermittent disturbance. And what I mean by that is that seed can sit in the seed bank for a long time.
Hmm.
Do you know how long?
At least 100 years.
It's way longer than that. We don't really know.
Yeah. I'd always heard that it was at least 100 years because that's about as long as we've been able to estimate it.
Well, there was one study that I found somewhere, and I've tried to find it again. I can't. So I don't know. I'll see if I can dig it up again. But there were some seeds that
Maybe you can
were
disc
being
it up.
stored in. Yeah, that's good. I'm gonna
It's
harrow it. I'm gonna harrow it up.
Hera.
Uh, harrow. So you got me. I forgot what I was even talking about. Alabama brain, buddy, rolling hard in here.
So if you don't like ragweed because you're allergic to it, they make
Don't
this
disc.
drug. It's available over the counter. It's called Claritin, and just take some of
There you go.
that because you want it for your turkeys.
So in we had the seed source from like the 1850s that were stored in various ways, and they did germination tests for all the way up till whenever that
Hmm.
study was published, and they still germinate just fine.
It's amazing.
It's like, wow. And then you start putting that in context, like, oh, that seed might have to sit there in the seed bank for 200 years if there's no, if you just happen to get in a place where forest succession takes over and you end up in climax succession, it might be quite a while before you get an opportunity again.
Yeah,
So it makes sense why that
makes
might
sense.
be. But I thought that was really cool when I found that about that plant. For the partridge pea, the partridge pea has a little gland. Do you know about this?
I didn't know plants could have glands.
See, this is called a extra floral gland or extra nectary gland. You'll find it under different names. But if you look at the leaf is compound. Are you writing this down?
Yeah, I'm taking notes.
The leaf is compound on partridge pea,
Right.
and
It
if you
looks
look
like
at the
like
base,
mimosa leaves.
yeah. So if you look at the base of the leaf, so basically the last pair of leaflets, there's this little bump. And that's what it looks like to me when I'm not looking at it through a microscope, but it's a little bump on the stem of the or the petiole of the plant,
Hmm.
and it produces a little drop of sugar basically that attracts ants. And the idea is that it keeps those ants on it all the time, and if something takes a bite of it, the ants will defend it basically from predators, which is pretty cool,
That is really
right?
cool.
I actually we haven't posted it yet, but I just kind of sometimes I do this kind of stuff because I get fascinated. But I went out in a field full of partridge peas, and it was deafening. The insects, like it just the buzzing and everything,
Hmm.
and I was like, I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to watch every single thing that I just watch what uses this extra nectary gland. We had I don't know how many species of insects, but just over like a 15-minute period, like several insect species came and used that nectary gland.
On the same
There was
plant?
yeah, well, I mean there was a group of plants there, but I was just
Okay.
watching them
Yeah.
and I was just picking out everything I could find. But there were several bees, a bunch of native bee species, and honeybees as well. Uh, we had a ladybug. One of our native ladybugs
Hmm.
came and drank from it. Several ants, all kinds of stuff. And I was just like, man, it's so attractive to insects. And here they are coming and drinking this little sugar droplet on
Yeah.
the base of the leaf. Isn't that cool?
That is really cool. I'm
So I
glad you
got
shared
fun
that.
facts about all of them.
I'm glad you shared that. I enjoyed it. I'm not
Well,
being sarcastic.
yeah, I bet.
I get,
We had a grasshopper on one of them. What is a grasshopper doing drinking the sugary nectar of of partridge pea?
the
That's
sugar.
what we should.
The sugar.
That's gonna be. We should make that the title of this episode. The sugary nectar of partridge pea. Oh man. Okay, let's
All
move
right.
on.
Up
We
next.
in hindsight, we probably shouldn't have a fun fact about everyone.
Yeah, this might take a while to get through. All right, so I'll throw out another genus, Desmodium.
You know, a fun fact, really fast. That's my favorite genus.
Is it?
Yeah, I actually give a bonus question in my class sometimes about that.
Okay. So
I
what
just
kind of
love that
bonus do I
genus.
get today for it?
Yeah, your bonus is you get to talk about Desmodium right now. I
So
can't believe you beat me to Desmodium. Like that's my jam there.
oftentimes referred to as perennial beggarweed. There's also an annual species that you'll find in Florida. Um,
Mhm,
but this is another one of those. Produces an excellent green forage, and it produces much larger seeds than any of the other plants that we've talked about so far in general. And
mhm.
so these are the seeds that you guys are familiar with. That you go out walking somewhere in the summertime or early fall, and you get these hitchhikers all over your pants.
Yeah, a little
Oftentimes,
triangular velvety seed that sticks
hmm
all over your britches.
oftentimes that's beggar weeds. So
Yeah,
another great
some of the
brooding.
Lespedezas can do that too, but they're the Desmodiums are really uh, aggressive about it.
They're good at it.
Hmm.
And there's a wide array of species within that genus. They're all trifoliate plants, and so you've got leaves with three leaflets on them. And a lot of these legumes that we're talking about, we've already mentioned several of them, are trifoliate plants. So that's one
Hmm.
thing to look out for some of these beneficial forbs. It's not 100% accurate in terms of determining what is beneficial, but it'll help
Hmm.
get you to a starting point.
Yeah, another one of those that is viewed as a pest to a lot of folks that don't know the wildlife value of it.
Hmm.
I'm talking about diehard turkey hunters, and they're irritated about walking through the woods in the fall and getting covered up with beggar's lice.
Yeah,
It's like, man, it's one of the top genera.
yeah. And it's
So
funny because sometimes I'll be out looking for it to show it to a class, and I can't find any plants. But then I look down and I have the seeds on my pants.
yeah,
It can be
it's
a
like,
little.
well,
It can be
it's here.
discreet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and there's so many species of it. Like, a lot of the times uh, when I'm doing my class, especially when I do the summer course, I mean, we'll have 8 or 9 species that we
yeah,
can see from wherever we're learning it.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
So,
you have some of them that have little slender leaves that are 5, 6 inches
mhm,
long, and then others that have these big round leaves that are a
mhm,
couple inches across, and everything in between.
yep, yep, lots of different kinds of them. But what you did remind me of another thing when you're kind of generalizing that plant trait. One thing that I often talk to people about is think about the adaptations of the plant. In particular, how does it disperse itself? So in that case, Desmodium is trying to get an animal close enough to it to stick its seeds all over its fur.
Hmm.
Usually, when a plant is using animals to disperse it, it is fairly high wildlife value. There are
Yeah,
exceptions, but usually that's the case.
right.
So, that's a good trait. If it has a fruit on it that, a fleshy fruit, now the exceptions are often non-native plants, and that often is the reason they're a problem is because animals will take them everywhere. But in general, from our native plants, if it has a fleshy fruit or it's using and sticking to animals to disperse itself, or somehow using animals, it often is a pretty good wildlife plant.
Hmm.
So another thing, just to why I feel like you're brewing up another genus or species that you want to throw out, but another characteristic that I think it might change the way that people look at plants. If a plant has a thorn on it or spine or what there's different kinds of prickles.
Hmm.
Uh, if it has something to defend, like a mechanical defense to herbivory, think of a lot of people always think, oh, that's not good for herbivores, but it's actually the opposite of that. It would not be worth it for the plant to carry that trait if it wasn't desirable to eat by
Yeah,
something.
that's right.
So, that's often a good characteristic if it has uh, some sort of protection like that. There are plenty of exceptions, but generally, a lot of our native plants that have some sort of mechanical defense are good herbivore plant at a
Yeah,
minimum.
like blackberry is a funny one because they produce a fruit that they're relying on animals to consume to disperse the seed, but
Hmm.
they also produce the thorns because they want to allow those to mature before they're
Hmm.
consumed. So
Yeah,
it's
no, a lot of people were like, well, why does it have the thorns if it isn't working? Because deer still wear
yeah,
blackberry out.
right.
Like, well, it is working. The deer didn't decimate it.
Imagine what it would be like if it didn't have them.
Yeah. So it did work.
Yep.
It's just about getting the seed to. All right, let's move on.
All right, the next one that I was going to throw out, even though I think it was your turn, but you were over there sharing fun facts, so I
Well,
is goldenrod because we've already mentioned it a couple times today, and goldenrod is going to be one is just, it's just kind of one of those plants that it's going to be common in
hmm
recently disturbed early successional
yeah.
areas.
In fact,
One of the first ones you get back.
sometimes it can be problematic
It
because
can,
it's too common,
yes,
especially Canada goldenrod. It seems like
yeah.
that one can be pretty aggressive sometimes.
Right. So you don't want to have so much of it that it's a monoculture and you don't have other
Hmm.
plants interspersed, but having some of it present provides good structural attributes.
Yeah.
It's going to attract some insects, but a lot of those insects are going to be up towards the top of the plant where it
Hmm.
flowers. It's got a big bright showy flower. Almost everybody probably knows what goldenrod looks like.
Hmm.
So they're going to be out of reach of poults, probably, and it tends to come on in later summer in addition to that as
Hmm.
well. But it's another one of these early successional community plants that is generally going to be a decent contributor to brooding cover.
Hmm. Yep, that's a good one. Uh, a genus that I was going to throw out there is Eupatorium,
Hmm.
and there are three groups kind of nested under that you probably know one of them and don't like it.
Hmm.
So that would be the dog fennels.
Yeah,
So there's a couple of species, but one of the dog fennels, is really prolific in disturbed soil and really tall, and
and overgrazed pastures, you'll see it a lot too.
yeah, you'll see it a bunch. And when it's dominating the area, it's not the most desirable thing, but having a little bit mixed in here and there is not a big deal. But I'm thinking more about the thoroughworts and the bone sets.
Yeah,
Those two classic umbrella type of flowering that they generally will have a white flower associated with it, but you'll see really high bug use and a pretty good structure when it's mixed into this kind of cover.
yeah. Late
So,
flowering bone sets are really common when throughout a
hmm
lot of the areas that I spend time in.
yeah,
Um,
I see that in the deep south a lot.
yeah,
So there's a whole bunch of them, but you can look up uh, thoroughwort or dog fennel or bone set and get as long as it's in that genus, you may have a different suite of species wherever you're at, but generally something in one of those groups is going to be around where you're at.
hmm. What about crabgrass? I know we've been on the forb train here for a while after we spent a lot of time on grasses earlier,
Hmm.
but crabgrass is kind of one of those that can be a blessing and a curse. I feel
Go
like.
on.
Well, most of your crabgrass species are annuals. You can, if you want to get rid of them, you can get rid of them pretty easily. They produce a fairly large seed that is going to be used by birds, um, but you don't want too much of it.
I'm generally trying to get rid of it.
Yes. I mean, you definitely, it's not something I try to keep around intentionally,
Mm,
but it's something that almost every manager is going to run into and have to contend with at some point when converting
yeah.
areas.
Well, and I have been in a few situations where people are just covered up with it,
Yeah.
and you definitely don't want that situation.
No.
But yeah, I'm generally trying to get rid of that one. There are a couple of them that you're going to see in there. I don't think they're the most desirable necessarily from a poult rearing
Mm,
standpoint, but as long as they're not completely dominating, they're okay to have around. One is giant ragweed. The
mm-hmm.
structure, it gets kind of tall. It's not something that you want dominating. The insect production or attraction is not as good as the common,
You'll see it a
but
lot of times in wetter
it,
areas.
yeah, I see it really commonly, and I'm not real bent out of shape about having it
Mm-hmm.
unless it's really dominant, which I have seen it in a couple of cases where it's really dominating the area. Another one that I was thinking about that aesthetically I think is nice to have as part of the field, and I see it really commonly would be like orange milkweed or butterfly
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
milkweed.
sure.
I see that show up really commonly. Another windblown seed. You'll see a whole bunch of larval, like caterpillars on it. So it's a larval host for a bunch of species. But another one that pretty good if it's part of the structure, and it's nice, to have some nice, brilliant looking flowers
Mm-hmm.
out there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think we could keep throwing more and more of these plants out, but I mean, especially with those several genera that we covered, that's a lot of plants that are common to
Hmm.
early successional areas, and I think will give people a good start as far as what to look for.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. There's a couple of other things like the woolly croton.
Yeah,
You're probably going to see some of that. You're
the
probably going
tropic
to see,
croton.
yeah. You're probably going to see the genus Helianthus, which is the native
Hmm.
sunflowers. You might see some of that. Rudbeckia,
They look
Bidens.
just like the normal agricultural sunflower that you're used to, except a lot
Hmm.
smaller.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to give you a list of things that you could look up in case you have some of these things. Bidens.
Hmm.
Uh, what's another one?
Rabbit tobacco is one that you're going to see.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The tall ironweed, Vernonia, that genus.
Hmm.
You'll see that really commonly. The place that I went yesterday, there was camphorweed everywhere.
Yeah,
So it seems like in flatwoods you might get into that
which
again.
is kind
Some
of a neutral plant.
Yeah, structurally, a lot of these
Yeah,
plants are fine. They're not necessarily the best ones from an insect availability standpoint, but not really a big problem. Sometimes I see the genus Rexia if it's really wet.
hmm,
So that'd be like your Meta Beauties. So a lot of really great plants. Don't want to overwhelm you, but instead give you some ideas of things to look up. Maybe you'll find
yeah. But
what you have in yours.
if they learn to identify, a lot of the ones we covered, like goldenrod, dog fennel, a few species from the Lespedeza genus, a few species from the Desmodium genus,
Yeah.
ragweed, partridge pea, and then the grasses that we mentioned. In addition to that, they're off to a really good start.
Yes.
That's a great foundation.
Absolutely. Is exactly right. You're doing really well, and it can be overwhelming. I know I've been trying to learn all the plants, and man, I still can't. Like I get out on places, and I mean, just yesterday I was on a place, and I was trying to figure out that this guy he was trying to manage some brooding cover, and he was just covered up with this grass. I didn't know what it was. I actually did know the genus, but I couldn't figure out the species. But finally got it nailed
Yeah,
down.
right.
Coreopsis was another one that he had everywhere. So that's
Hmm.
another genus of yellow flowers that you might
Yeah,
see
they're pretty.
commonly in these kind of areas. Yeah, really nice. So lots of good stuff out there. All right. Well, I think we've adequately given people plenty of plants, hopefully ubiquitously across the range of where our listeners are. The genera will definitely apply where you're at.
Yeah,
So, if you're having trouble with one of these species, look up the genus, and you probably have some representatives in that genus where you're at.
yeah. And you can probably look at, most states have a state plant atlas or you can go to the university's extension website, and they'll have a lot of plants listed out there. And so you can use these genera that we've shared as kind of a starting point and find common species that are representatives of each of those genera within your area.
Yeah, exactly.
Those are for our true dedicated followers that are actually going to go out and do some homework. And if you do, tell us about it. We'd love to hear it.
Absolutely. And send us some pictures.
Yeah.
Like if you've got some cool plants coming up in your brood patch, I'd like to see them. I might even have a fun fact about them. You never know.
So what I just heard is Marcus is guaranteeing a fun fact for every plant photo that you send him. So
no.
Y'all blow up his inbox.
Yeah, you can send them to @Dr. Will Goldsby. No, I'm kidding. I love the interaction with the audience, so you guys send away.
Cool.
All right, let's wrap this one up.
Enjoyed it. Hope that helps you guys. Craig gave you a lot of good details on how to do it, how to get there, and then hopefully, with today's episode followed up by doing some homework, you guys will be able to identify when you're getting there or areas that still need some work.
Yeah, absolutely. Hope y'all enjoyed it. As always, thanks for listening. For everybody that's rated the podcast and left us a review and everything, we really appreciate it. We couldn't do this without y'all.
Yes.
We appreciate all the help. So thanks, everybody. Until next time.
Thank y'all. Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.